Okay, I'm just going to show a couple of quick times here of two shots we had that are pretty representative of the cloth sims. Okay, so that was the Bright Wizard, and there were like 5 passes on him, and the next shot has the Shadow Warrior and the Chaos Marauder. And I'll just kind of go through the process of how we get to that point. It basically starts out with Jed coming to me and saying, "Hey, we've got another Warhammer cinematic coming up," and he's usually pretty sheepish because these tend to have tons of cloth in them. It's like there will be belts and belt buckles and capes and hammers and swords and all kinds of dangly bits that we have to deal with, and then throw that in with lots of orc on elf violence, and it's lots of challenges, but we always learn a lot. So what'll happen is Jed will come to me and we'll sit down and we'll look at the either the storyboards or even just a description of it and some sketches of the characters, and from that we'll just go back and forth on, hey, what do we think needs to be simmed for these? And these are hero characters, and in Warhammer we had 8 real hero characters that needed cloth setups, and just some totals for what happened in this production. We had 8 characters with cloth setups. We had 80 cloth sims, and each of those had multiple passes. And from that, each character took about 3 to 5 days for the actual cloth setup, and then the sims were another story. But starting back at the beginning, we sit down, we figure out what needs cloth, and then it goes to basically sitting with someone like Z, who's modeling the characters, and she'll come to me and we'll figure out if there are any special needs for the cloth and the way it needs to be modeled. And sometimes I'll say, "Z, can you move that G-string a little bit?" And she'll say, "No, it's not sexy that way." And I'll say, "Please," and we'll come to an agreement how it can be sexy and can be simmed. And so what'll happen is she'll finish one of her models, and I'll get that mesh, and I'll start, as the animators, like Brian will be taking that. It'll go through rigging, and then Brian will get it, or one of the animators, and they'll start animating it. And while they're doing that, I'll take that model and start setting it up for cloth. And basically that involves taking it and building custom drivers for all the meshes that are going to be simmed. So in this case, what I'm looking for is to build really clean geometry that really has uniform edges. So we have a couple tools that we've written that allow us to do that, to shrink wrap the meshes, to get the exact same profiles, but with a lot cleaner geometry that sims really well. And just the main thing about the setup that I've learned over the years is if you're going to spend time, spend it on the accuracy of the collision objects, because those, if you spend the time in that and doing the modeling for the collision objects, it really makes a huge difference when you get into doing tons of shots and you're dealing with really a level of accuracy that you don't have to worry so much about. And from that, so once I've got the setup done on those, animation by that time is starting to come in. Like the other guy said, it's a stack pipeline, it's a parallel pipeline. So as all the other things are going on, they're animating, they're modeling more characters. I'll start getting some animation, and at that point there are point caches out there that I can grab, and I'll start setting up the cloth sim for the shots. And these sims are being driven purely by point caches, so there's no rig in the file. It's just all mesh and driving all this. So as soon as there's animation point cached, I can start setting up a shot. And that process basically goes with bringing in the animation and just scrubbing through it, looking at it from the angles, figuring what's going to be on screen, where can I cut corners, where can I optimize it. You know, I'm figuring out what settings are going to be needed. Is the cloth heavy? Is it metal? Is it rigid? And in Warhammer, for the first time, I started doing a lot of these rigid objects actually in the max cloth modifier by doing some really stiff settings. We were able to keep it all in cloth, so it made it a lot easier to incorporate it. And at that point, we've got tools written that will allow us to kind of populate the shots as they start being completed. And at that point, each shot, we're looking through there, and the certain challenges that you come across, especially in these fight scenes, is you'll have a lot of extreme body poses, which creates a lot of pinch points. That's just really the bane of cloth sim. So stepping through these files and doing a first pass sim, just kind of sitting there babysitting it to figure out where the problem areas and what am I going to have to work on as the animation is being through second and third pass and being finalized. And once that's done, I point cache out my cloth sims, and we have scripts that for scene assembly will allow them to just drop those in as those are done. So the point caches will show up for the scene assembler, they'll merge those in, and they just take the place of the skin meshes that have been there all the while. And
then we'll be like, hey John, there's penetration on this sim, and he's like, wait, this was off, sorry. Then we'll be like, hey John, there's penetration on your hardest sim, and we need you to redo it. And we'll be best friends then.
Yeah, exactly. And that's about it. And we get the stuff to scene assembly. These guys render it, and it turns out great as usual. That's it.
We're kind of running out of time here, so very quickly before Brendan shows all the pyrotechnics, I was just going to show, in using the Dark Elf from Z, I just wanted to show a little breakdown of the one sequence where the Dark Elf is featured, and to just kind of show it starting from the storyboards that Chuck did all the way up, and how it transitions all the way up to scene assembly and final renders. So I think by the time the shot is actually finished, like about 7 people have touched the character. So once the storyboards are done, we'll do an animatic, which at that time we didn't really have the model finished, so we used the one from the previous Warhammer. Then we'll go into motion capture. So this is the animation of the actual scene. We got a pretty hot actress. From then on, we'll move on to animation. And then once animation is done cleaning up all that mocap data, they'll point cache it, and then we'll get it back into Max. So that's very simple representation of what the animation is coming out of the XSI. Then Jon does his thing, so that's the cloth simulation. Then we have another artist, Becca Baldwin, that will do all the hair simulation. And in the case of the Dark Elf, it was pretty intense, as you can see. You can feel those 320 splines right there. Then we'll move on to effects, and especially in her sequence, she's got a couple hero spells. And then it will go into lighting, rendering, compositing, and then that's how we kind of break down shot. Not everything is rendered together. It's quite a long journey between Z and the final image. But then Brendan gets to do all the fun stuff at the end.
Hi everybody, my name is Brandon. I was the effects supervisor on this project, and I'm going to go over basically the effects pipeline. But before I do it, I'm just going to play this thing so you can get a feel for what I'm talking about. This thing's a minute long, there's no audio, so it might be kind of awkward. So you just... Okay, I'm not going to say much over this. When it finishes, I'll kind of go into details. This is just a basic overview of most of the effects load in the project, and everything that we had to address from shot to shot. Okay, so that was it in a nutshell. I'm just going to let this thing run while I talk. Basically, what we need to do when you're looking at this effects overview, what you're seeing is basically 3 types of effects. You're seeing environmental effects, and by that I mean stuff that just interacts with the environment, stuff that's ambient like that, the fogs and the embers and the debris. And then you're seeing service effects, which there wasn't a lot of in this project. Service effects usually mean like gunshots, bullet hits, footfalls, that kind of stuff. We didn't have a lot of that stuff in this, so we could focus more on some of the more environmental stuff. And then we had, you're seeing some hero effect shots in here. And one of the things that made this project so challenging from an effects standpoint is that there were tons of hero effect shots. I mean, there were like the squig and the squig birth, like this guy in 2 shots, the bright wizard burning everybody. I mean, it was just crazy. So it was, the effects load in this was so heavy that to make it, well, in addition to all the hero shots, I wanted to have just stuff going on in every single shot. Like, I didn't want any dead pixels. I wanted every single shot to have just stuff blowing around because it's a battle scene. So what I did to facilitate that was simmed out a bunch of fume effects grids and a bunch of particle flow setups, and I point cached a bunch of particle flow setups. And I made like a little environmental effects package that I handed out to the scene assemblers. And then they could just go ahead and integrate that into all their shots really easily. So that took that off of the plate, and then we could concentrate more on all the shots that needed like the most attention. One of the tricks that I use to get so much stuff into this thing is when I was simming out all my fume effects grids, I would always sim out like frame buffers, like 50 or 100 frames for the beginning and the end of the shot. So there was always play out for all the effects. And I would also sim out, like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with fume effects, but I made heavy use of velocity channels. So every single fume effects sim that I did, I would sim out a velocity channel so I could later pipe a bunch of particles through it. And the more I got along into the project, the more assets I had built up to use. And so, like, some of these shots are just, like, there's ludicrous amounts of particles, and I'm like, this actually got shot down because Jerome said there was too many particles in there. But this is a good example of, this is one of the last shots I did, and, there was probably 12 passes.
You don't even need an environment.
Yeah, Scene assemblers if they're environments. So, so you're looking at like 7 particle passes. There was like 5 fume effects passes. So the point is, as I was going through the process of doing all these shots, I was just building up this huge database of assets that I could reuse. Some of the biggest challenges for the hero shots were like these environmental dismantlement shots. That's always a really hard thing to do. Especially the way we have our pipeline set up, and the model kind of gets built first, and then, I come in later and do all these damage shots, and it's sometimes a little bit of a challenge to get this thing to play, apparently. There we go. I guess I'll go over my basic tool set, and I use mostly particle flow, obviously fume effects, a little bit of thinking particles, but not much, and reactor, mostly for all the damage sims. So my pipeline process for this kind of shot, this kind of hero shot, is taking the environment model. I'll remodel it if I have to. I kind of had to do it on this shot. Had to remodel a bunch of this stuff so I could properly damage it. Then I derive a lot of my other stuff off of my, my sim geometry pieces, and then all my fume gets derived off those same pieces. The other heavy hero shot was this guy at the end, this big chicken guy. When I looked at the concept, I was like, you kidding me? I got to make this thing look evil? Some of their requests that they wanted this guy to be, he's the Lord of Change. I don't play games, so I don't really know what the hell I'm talking about, but he changes environment around him, and they wanted these characters to be reverting into infants and then turning into rats, and then the rats running away and turning into whatever. So I just put a bunch of fume on there, a bunch of particles. seemed to work pretty good. So basically, I don't want to go too much into the technicalities of how we did the hero shots, but Jerome seemed to be shocked that we could get this many effects into this thing in so short amount of time, and the way that we accomplished it is just by making a bunch of presets and just being smart with our fume sims, simming things out longer, and making reusable assets. So that's about it. I'm not the last. He's asked me if I was the last one. He asked me if I was the last one to do anything to work on the project. I'm not the last one. I kind of work concurrently with the scene assembly guys. It's usually me, the effects supervisor, and the scene assembly supervisor polishing stuff up for the last, maybe couple of days a week at the end of the project. But effects kind of runs concurrently at the end of the pipeline with scene assembly. Do what now? He asked me if I import the particles into Max. I do everything in Max. So like Fume Effects is in Max. All my particle systems that I use are in Max. So it all stays in Max. I never leave Max. Anybody else? No, not for this project. I render most of my stuff in scanline stuff. Oh, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting to repeat the question. He asked me if the fire was rendered in Mental Ray. The answer is no. I render most of that stuff in scanline. In fact, I don't think I rendered anything in Mental Ray in this entire project. I stayed in scanline just because it's faster for what I need to do, and it's just more reliable. Mental Ray just now became, well, I mean, you can render Fume in Mental Ray now, but it's a little bit wanky still, so I'm still not using it in production.
I have a question for Z. Regarding what software do you use for doing your textures and stuff? Do you use straight Photoshop? Or are you using 3D Paint?
Okay, he asked me what kind of software I use to texture my character. I started with Photoshop. After I unwrapped the UV, I use Photoshop to do the base color, like the skin, just kind of yellow tone. And then after that, I export OBJ into body paint. And then I use photo reference to just like really fast, just lay it out. And I paint out the seam back in Photoshop. And sometimes I do the projection painting in body paints. And I also use ZBrush, the C-App link. So it's pretty fast. Like you can do multiple layer. But the difference between ZBrush and body paint that I like is body paint, you have a lot of layers, like kind of like Photoshop. So you can toggle it on and off, and then you can export the PSD file, and it's pretty fast. So I just kind of use Photoshop, ZBrush, and body paint. No, I haven't tried that yet, but I've been doing Photoshop most of it. Yeah. You're welcome.
What size of the production?
Is that for?
That's for you.
The size of the team for Warhammer, I would have to look, but it wasn't really big. The reason being that this project actually ran for quite a bit of time. We started, I think we started in August, and then we delivered somewhere in May, which is unheard of in Blur history. I think usually all our projects run around 3 months. We've done some projects a lot faster than that, but we don't really like to do that fast. But anyway, the point is, when we have that much time, we usually have smaller teams. Usually, it's when we have a quick turnaround, then there's a lot of people that work on the project. When we have longer schedules, then we have smaller teams. Usually, we like smaller teams and longer schedule just because it keeps things more consistent, and we can keep artists longer. But I would say, I think the maximum we had maybe 4 or 5 character modelers. We had 1 layout artist. We had 2 actually, but always 1 at the same time. Maybe 5 character modelers. Animation, Brian?
6 animators.
6 animators. And then for scene assembly, I think it was a core team of maybe 4 guys doing all the rendering and lighting all the shots. And then effects was...
Like 5 guys off and on.
But it really was Brendan for 90% of it. So it was... The reason the project took that long is actually the the game release date was getting pushed on Mythic side. And when that happens, we usually reshuffle resources at Blur and put the people that were, so if we have 10 people supposed to work for 3 weeks and then we know that the game date is going to be pushed, we usually take some people off the project and put them on the other projects that need it. And then that way we'll keep smaller teams for a longer period. Does that answer it?
Find that's more cost effective to have a longer time and a smaller team than shorter time and a bigger team?
I think it's about the same. I mean, cost effective is, I mean, we try to be cost effective everywhere. I think it's better to have, I mean, on a project like this, for example, I think it's more cost effective to have a longer schedule. I mean, when you can have Brandon work on 90% of the shot and reuse so much of the things he's doing. I mean, I think that's how we managed to get that much. And I think that was the same for scene assembly and Cloth too. I think a project like that, it puts a tremendous strain on people like John or Becca that do the Cloth simulation. We have a team of 6 animators, but but there's only one Jon Jordon at Blur that's doing all the Cloth sims for every single shot. So on a project like that, you definitely have to have a longer schedule.
The question was, when I said I made the crowds procedurally, he wanted to know exactly what I was talking about that. Basically, when I rented out the IFL sequences, I then spit those IFL sequences back on the cards and then use particle flow and then generated them on the field. Does that answer your question? So, yeah.
One line question. Did you think we might be using massive instead of the PC?
We don't have massive at Blur, no.
How many girls worked on the project? I think a grand total of 3 with Z, Becca, and Reedy. Oh, hell no. That's that's much lower than that. Yeah, that's the 3 girl artists that we have at Blur. They all worked on the project.
I'm just curious, is there any particular reason why you use 3D Max instead of like Maya or any other software?
So why Max over Maya? Do we want to get into the discussion? Autodesk says it doesn't matter anymore. Lots of reasons, but I mean, we're not. It's difficult to get into the reasons why. I mean, Blur has always been a traditionally a 3ds Max house, so just by force of habit and the amount of tools and the amount of resources that we have now that no Max in and out, I think it would be you'd have to prove to us that you can do something so much better in another software for us to switch. It would be I think we can do pretty much whatever we want with that software now.
Way in the back there.
How many riggers did you have?
How many riggers did we have? I think we had 3. They're all here.
Most character animation done by motion capture. Do you guys go in and tweak it after that?
That's a question for Brian.
So the question was, what was it again? It was we. Yeah, I would say for this project, it was, yeah, I would say it was probably like 80% motion capture. And, but it does go through heavy amount of editing and retiming. So, yeah.
You did use a lot of keyframe.
There's a decent amount of keyframe. Like the Lord of Change was all keyframe. That was the big chicken. The squig, the big meatball guy. And you know, so like that orc that slams into the rooftop and things like that. So there were certain parts, little select shots that were all keyframe. But for the most part, a majority of the shots were all motion capture. So.
One back there and then here. So, I thought the camera was doing really well, and here's how much to the talk more about hair sim.
John, you want to talk about hair sims?
So I think the question was just a basic how the hair sim is done. Basically, they'll take whatever the modeler does, they'll take those splines, and from those splines they'll extract planes, basically cloth strips, and those will actually get the sim, and then the actual model hairs from Hair Effects are then skin wrapped onto those planes, and that is then the actual Hair Effects is turned to a cloth mesh that is point cached out. Then they load that in scene assembly and just render that. And it's using the same thing I'm using. It's the Max native cloth sim.
I have a similar question regarding for the cloth simulations. You have to write a lot of custom scripts, like your own scripts to render the simulations. Most of the stuff that you have to do was already done in Max. You just have to
Your question was about the actual sims or the rendering of the sims, or the cloth sim. It's again, it's using the cloth modifier in Max, and I've written a script that basically it helps. Just it's kind of a grab bag of tools to help set up the files, to help set up the actual rig for the cloth sim. But it's pretty straightforward using the Max cloth and using a lot of the sub-object constraints and then to tweak the collision objects using a lot of a lot of the relax and push modifiers, and that's all animated. So it's pretty straightforward.
One more.
The question was, he saw my character was posed, and he asked me if I started with pre-rig, and the answer is I usually do a character like after the proportion, I put the biped, and every time I just kind of, I have like, I align the joints to the model, and then I start posing it, like just throw a quick skin modifier on it, and then I pose her, and then, so the question is, I don't use a pre-rig, but I do a quick rig every time. Mm-hmm.